Now that we've taken a good look at conditional statements and conditional blocks, let's have a look at a situation which requires a slightly more complex use of conditional blocks. So far we've only really looked at simple conditions. Whether or not those conditions are actually multiple, as in we use logical operators to combine two conditions, we still only get either a true or a false value, and we're either taking true or not true. Even in the case of an else-if ladder, out of all the if or else-if conditions, or the else condition at the end, we're only actually going to carry out one of those. And as soon as one is evaluated true, we ignore the rest. This doesn't allow us to recreate more complicated patterns of logic within our Perl scripts. If we wanted to do something like this, for instance, we'd have to take a slightly different approach to the way we scripted our conditional blocks. Let's take a look at the logic here. Instead of simply choosing between whether we're in a hurry or not, and choosing whether to run or to stroll more slowly, once we've got past the first branch in our code, we're then presented with another branch on either side. So if we are in a hurry, then we move over to this branch, and then the condition of whether or not we have a car is evaluated either true or false. If we do, then we drive. If we don't, then we have to run. Similarly, on the other side, if we're not in a hurry, if we're tired, maybe we won't even bother to make the journey at all. Whereas if we're not, then we'll stroll along at our own pace. So let's take a look at the way this translates into Perl script. It's rather similar to the other conditional blocks we've seen. There's nothing actually new in this pattern here. If we're hurrying, then we execute this block. Otherwise, we execute this block. But within each of the blocks, there are inner conditions and inner conditional blocks. Depending on how each of the conditions evaluate, we take a different path through our Perl script. I've nested it here to 2 levels, but we could take it even further if we wanted to. Let's take a quick look at our text editor, and we're going to see how we can build a script that takes this kind of technique into account. Let's say we have a couple of variables set up. The weather, which is raining, and another scalar variable, which is bus late. And this is a simple, what we call a Boolean, and it's either going to be true or false. So a very simple way to express that is 1 for true or 0 for false. Just like the binary figures that make up the most basic building blocks of a computer's logic. So let's say that it is raining and that the bus is late. We can set up a condition here to check whether the weather is rainy. Now, within that, we need to then check whether the bus is late. There are 2 ways we could do this. One way is to use logical operators and create 2 entirely separate blocks. So if the weather is raining and the bus is late, we're going to say that's typical. Then we could set up another block down here, which is going to say if weather is raining and the bus is not late, and we use the not logical operator there, then we're going to say something more cheerful. And we can even turn this into an else if. So in this case, let's see what we come up with. typical is what our program outputs, because the values that we set up at the beginning was that the weather was raining and the bus was late. If we say the bus is not late, then the other response is given by our program. However, there is some redundancy here. We're checking this condition twice. We're checking to see if the weather is raining and if the bus is late. And then, if that's not true, we're checking to see whether the weather is raining again. This is pretty redundant. What we can do is we can take this out and put it inside here. And this is how we nest our conditions. We can get rid of this block entirely and put it in here. This is where indenting of our Perl script becomes very important. We don't really have to put all these indents in, but it makes it a lot clearer to understand. We can see then that there's an outer block with two curly brackets here, and then we can see that within that block there are other blocks to be either carried out or ignored depending on whether the inner condition here is true. And if we wanted, we could put as many more blocks in here as we wanted. So we can nest many levels of conditions and conditional blocks within our Perl scripts. And this does exactly the same thing as we did with our two sets conditions using logical operators. But we've expressed it in a way that doesn't check for the same condition twice, is a lot more clear, and is a lot more efficient. So by using nested conditions, we're able to express complex scenarios and decision-making processes that allow our Perl scripts to take into account a wide variety of scenarios.